Take a second, close your eyes, and picture this. Your head is nestled on your warm pillow. The down blanket moves from your body as you stretch your hands into the air. There's a ray of sunlight coming through the window next to you, welcoming you to a new day. And the soft whir of the fan by your bedside makes you feel like there's no troubles that you can't overcome. You roll over, grab your phone, and panic ensues because you slept through your alarm. You got to get up. The kids got to get ready. You got to get to work. Breakfast still needs to be made. You don't know what's going on. You just panic. And fantasy football can be exactly the same way. You can be sleeping on way too many players prior to your draft. And if you don't set your alarm and wake up and pay attention to some of these players, you might be panicking when you wake up after week 16 and you've lost your fantasy football championship. So make sure you set your alarm and hit that like button, because in this video of Deep Sleepers, I've got at least one guy that you better be paying attention to so you can make sure that you're not sleeping throughout the entire season. What's up, Headliner Nation? Welcome back to the Fantasy Headliners. Kyle here with a Deep Sleepers episode. I've got three guys that we're going to talk about in this show. One in particular that I think people are completely overlooking come draft season. And I want to make sure that I give you some information, some stats, and some deep diving knowledge so you can make a decision on whether or not you should be adding these guys to your roster in 2020. Before we jump into all that information, though, I just want to remind everyone out there, if you love the Fantasy Headliners and you want more content, you can get it over on Patreon. You can go to the link down below in the description of this video, or go to patreon.com and search the Fantasy Headliners. And for as little as $5 a month, you can get access to our exclusive podcast, all of our exclusive videos, and all of our exclusive articles that only Patreon members can get into. So make sure you read through everything there on that diagram. You can join any one of those tiers. The $5 tier is the minimum, though, to get access to all of that extra information. So if you love what we do here on the channel, you're going to love what we do on Patreon just as much. So head over to Patreon, subscribe to the Fantasy Headliners today if you can. But for now, we got to talk about some players that you should have on your draft board, or at least should be diving deeper into to see if they should be deep sleepers for you here in 2020. All right, the first guy that I've got for you is the big name here in this video. This is the guy that I really want you to pay attention to. Last season, Mike Williams was shooting up draft boards because everybody wanted to get their hands on a potential breakout season. Now, he didn't have a bad season last year, but he definitely didn't return the volume that a lot of you spent on him in draft capital. But this year, people have completely forgotten about him, because when you bring up Tyrod Taylor's name, people automatically just say, nope, there's no way Tyrod Taylor can get it done. But maybe Tyrod Taylor is a good fit for Mike Williams, and let me try to convince you why. With Mike Williams last year, again, not that bad of a season. 49 receptions, 1,001 yards. The issue was the 2 touchdowns. The guy just didn't score a whole lot of touchdowns. But Mike Williams is a true deep threat. He is a guy that can go down the field and win. If he had scored like 8 touchdowns last year, we'd be looking at him a lot different. So maybe there is some positive regression here with Mike Williams, and we see him climb up to more touchdowns. And this is why Tyrod Taylor can potentially get it done. But first, last season, in terms of Mike Williams' deep play, and again, deep targets, yards, catches, all of that are plays that are 20 plus yards down the field. So his 28 deep targets last year was tied for 4th. His 12 deep receptions was tied for 5th. And his 471 deep yards was 5th in the league. He did have 17.4 average targeted air yards, which was the highest in the NFL. So again, Phillip Rivers was trying to look for him down the field. But this is where things get really interesting. Out of his 28 deep targets last year, only 14 of those were catchable, and he had 2 yards of average separation. Now, the reason that is concerning and interesting all at the same time is because we know that Phillip Rivers' arm just isn't what it used to be. And if he had trouble going down the field last year, it really showed in Mike Williams' numbers. And this is one of the things that may have ended up happening. Because if Mike Williams is beating cornerbacks down the field, there is a chance that during his route, he has more than just 2 yards of separation. But if he's being underthrown by Phillip Rivers, because Phillip Rivers just cannot get the ball down the field, he has to stop his route and come back to the ball. So for instance, maybe he has 4 yards of separation at the time the ball is released, and then he can't keep that because the ball is underthrown. He has to stop and go up for the ball. Now the average separation has closed quite a bit because the cornerback is running down the field as fast as he can. He has to stop and come back to the ball, and now they've closed on each other. So that could be one of the biggest reasons why he just didn't score enough touchdowns last season, because Phillip Rivers just couldn't get the football down the field. So maybe that's why Tyrod Taylor is a better fit for Mike Williams here in 2020. I do expect Mike Williams to continue to be that deep target in LA. And Tyrod Taylor in the past has shown he is not afraid to go down the field. Now, I went back to his Buffalo numbers when he was a full-time starter, when he was the guy in Buffalo, because those are the numbers that really stick out to me the most. In 2017, he was tied for 8th highest in deep passes, with 13.8% of his passes being deep. In 2016, it was a little bit lower at 13.3%, 11th highest in the league. But this is where things get really interesting. When Tyrod Taylor had a good season back in 2015, he was really good at going down the field. And when we think about Tyrod Taylor in Buffalo, the one thing we think about is he just dumped off to his tight end. Well, that didn't really end up being the case in 2015. His 69 deep attempts were 8th highest. His 28 deep completions, 5th highest. His 1,014 deep yards, 5th highest. His deep touchdowns, 12, tied for 2nd in the league, and his deep completion percentage of 18.2, his deep passing percentage of 18.2% was 1st in the league. That wasn't completion, that was deep percentage. I apologize for that. And then his deep passer rating of 109.5 was 2nd in the league. So Tyrod Taylor showed us back in Buffalo in 2015 that he could go down the field. He could do it with accuracy, he could do it often, and he could be really good at it. So even though a lot of people are sleeping on Keenan Allen, they're looking towards Austin Eckler, no one's really talking at all about Hunter Henry, and Mike Williams has completely fallen off draft boards. This could be the guy that unlocks the potential on your roster, because you could draft Mike Williams as a wide receiver 5 or 6 right now and get an awesome value on him. And if he ends up hitting on some of this deep play value this year, even if it's a little inconsistent, you've gotten him so late that for you, he's a weekly flex play that you could toss in there if he's going up against a weak defense, or maybe he's going up a team like Kansas City where they're going to have to be throwing the ball an awful lot. That division this year is going to score a lot of points, and LA is going to have to score a lot of points to keep up with them. And if LA is scoring points, I'm willing to bet that Mike Williams is also scoring points. So definitely keep an eye on him and do not overlook him on draft day, because he could be one of the best values in 2020. All right, next on my list is another deep tight end stash this year that could end up helping your team out, and that's Irv Smith Jr. from the Minnesota Vikings. Last year, I don't want to say a loss season for Irv Smith Jr. because that was, your rookie season is never really a lost season unless you get hurt or you just never play. He played. He just didn't get a whole lot of volume. 36 receptions, 311 yards, 2 touchdowns, 8.6 yards per reception. Nothing there jumps off the page to you. But there are some other stats that might make you reconsider looking at him as your tight end 2 this year. So last year, he did have a catch percentage of 78.3%. That was 7th among tight ends that had at least 40 receptions. Now, Irv Smith Jr. only had 36, but I decided to round it up just to kind of keep things a little bit more even, okay? So it didn't really change anything that much, but I rounded up to 40 to take a look at some of those guys that had a little bit more receptions, because if you have more receptions, you're a little bit more elite, and I want to stack Irv Smith Jr. up against some of the better tight ends so you see just how valuable he could be. His 56.6% route percentage was 14th among tight ends. And that means plays that you were on the field, passing plays that you ran a route on. So when the Minnesota Vikings passed the ball and he was on the field, he ran a route 56.6% of the time. So that's good because he was out there running those routes. Even though he wasn't getting the looks or getting the volume, he was still running the routes. He wasn't strictly being looked at as more of a blocking tight end. He did average 1.77 yards of separation, 12th among tight ends. And he did have 1.68 fantasy points per touch, which was 18th among tight ends. Again, nothing here jumps off the page that says Irv Smith Jr. is going to be an elite tight end this year. So that's not the picture I'm trying to paint. Remember, this is deep sleepers, okay? This isn't breakout players. This is deep sleepers. He did have 107.7 QB rating when being targeted, though. So, again, when Kirk Cousins was looking his way on those very few plays, Kirk Cousins had a pretty good QB rating doing it. Now, I really like Irv Smith Jr., but I also like the Kirk Cousins tight end connection. If you remember when he was back as the full-time starter in Washington, Kirk Cousins was a big fan of Jordan Reed, a huge fan of Jordan Reed. So from 2015 to 2017, when he was the full-time starter in Washington, he played 32 games with Jordan Reed. Over those 32 games, Reed had 238 targets, 180 receptions, 1,849 yards, and 19 touchdowns. Broke it down to a per game basis because 2015, Reed was fully healthy, and then 2016, 2017, injury concerns like he's basically had his entire career. So on a per game basis, that ended up coming out to 7.43 targets per game, 5.62 receptions per game, 57.78 yards, and 0.5 touchdowns per game. And in 2015, when the Redskins didn't have a whole lot at wide receiver, Reed led the Redskins in targets, receptions, yards, and touchdowns. So he was the main receiving weapon for Kirk Cousins back in 2015. Now, the Vikings have a lot more weapons now than what the Redskins did back then. So again, I don't expect Irv Smith Jr. to leap off the page and all of a sudden become this elite tight end that nobody was talking about. But the fact remains that Irv Smith Jr. was drafted because of his athletic ability, which is also good because even though Kyle Rudolph is on the roster and really makes a lot of fantasy owners kind of step back from Irv Smith Jr., they're different players. Irv Smith is really your athletic he's not your prototypical wide receiver. He's an athletic receiving wide receiver. This is a guy that can split out into the slot quite a bit. What if the wide receiver that we were waiting to replace Stephon Diggs is actually Irv Smith Jr.? It's not even a wide receiver. It's not Justin Jefferson. There's the possibility that you can put Thielen and Jefferson on the outside, Kyle Rudolph plays tight end, and Irv Smith Jr. sees about the same amount of volume out in the slot that we saw from like Mike Gesicki and the Miami Dolphins last year. If that happens, he becomes a viable receiving threat every single game, and Kirk Cousins is going to look his way more often. I also expect a lot more two tight end sets, so he's also going to line up as a typical tight end quite a bit. But again, as we saw from last year, half the time he lines up, he's going to end up running a route. He's not the tight end that they're typically bringing in to block for Dalvin Cook. They want to use him as a weapon. It's all about getting open this year, and he's athletic enough to do that. So again, if you're in a league that has a little bit deeper benches, if you're in a league like a dynasty league that allows like taxi squad and things like that, you definitely want to have some Irv Smith Jr. shares this year. But if you don't end up drafting him because you're in like more of a shallow league and you only typically take one tight end, that's okay. Leave him on waiver wires. Make sure you mark him and keep a track on him, because as soon as he has a big game, you might want to grab him and have him on your roster for the rest of the season. Now, the final player that I have to talk about in this video is definitely a deep sleeper, and he's a guy that not a lot of people are going to draft, and I'm not even telling you to draft him in your fantasy leagues this year unless you have really deep benches. But he is a guy that's forgotten about because the Buffalo Bills already have Devin Singletary and drafted Zach Moss. And I don't get the Zach Moss love. I don't like Zach Moss. To me, TJ Yeldon is the backup in Buffalo. Now, the reason no one's really talking about TJ Yeldon is because the guy didn't do crap last year, right? Ended up being hurt a majority of the season. He had Devin Singletary and Frank Gore ahead of him on the depth chart, so he wasn't really getting that fair of a shake anyway, even if he was healthy. Only 17 attempts last year. But let's go back to 2018, his final season in Jacksonville, when he was a guy that was relied on a little bit more in the game plan. In the passing game, and this is why I believe TJ Yeldon is going to be the backup in Buffalo, is because of his work in the passing game. So in 2018, he averaged 8.85 yards per reception. That was 8th among running backs that had at least 50 receptions. He had 8.09 yards after the catch per reception. That was 7th among running backs with at least 50 receptions. Now, these numbers don't really jump off the page at all, but his 4 end zone targets and his 3 end zone TDs were first among running backs. His 4 end zone targets was tied for first with a man by the name of Todd Gurley. His 5.5 end zone reception percentage was number 1 in the league as well. And on a points per touch and a yards per route run basis, he was pretty good. 1.10 points per touch, 18th among running backs, and 1.57 yards per route run, 8th among running backs, again with at least 50 receptions. So again, nothing about TJ Yeldon jumps off the page, okay? He's not a guy that you're going to get and start quite a bit. But here's the thing to remember with TJ Yeldon, okay? He's going to be the receiving back in Buffalo. So if for any reason they get down or are playing from behind, maybe you see a little bit more TJ Yeldon. But the thing to remember too about Zach Moss is the guy comes to the NFL with an absolutely horrific injury profile. Dr. Ethan Turner, our guy here at the Fantasy Headliners that examines injuries for us, did a rookie draft guide prior to the season, and if you bought it, you've already seen it. But Zach Moss has a horrible injury profile. The guy was just riddled with injuries at Utah. And not only that, but he's not really that explosive of a back. He's not a guy that's going to get to the outside and hit another gear and get down the field. He looks slow to the outside for me. He has a purpose, though. He's a plotter. He's a guy that's going to get some short yardage and goal line situations. That's going to be his work. It's not going to be in the passing game. That won't end up being what happens. TJ Yeldon will get a look at that. So if anything were to happen to Zach Moss this year, and you're a Devin Singletary owner, then TJ Yeldon is next up on the list for you. And that's why I want you to keep an eye on him, because if you like Devin Singletary as much as we do this year, and I really like Devin Singletary, TJ Yeldon is going to end up being the guy to back him up. I don't believe Zach Moss will end up being the guy to back him up. So just make sure you put him on your cheat sheet. Just keep aware of him. See where he's not going to end up going. He's going to end up going undrafted. But just see where he ends up being on your list of players after you're done drafting. And again, mark him on that watch list so you know if something happens, you can end up taking a shot on him later on. So there you have it, Headliner Nation. A couple of deep sleepers and then one guy in Mike Williams that you really need to be targeting this season. But I hope you really enjoyed the episode and all the information that we had here for you. Do me a favor, hit that like button down below, subscribe to the channel if you've never subscribed to the channel, and then leave a comment below with some guys that you are also targeting as deep sleepers. Are there any videos that you're interested in? Any players that you want us to take a look at that we haven't done already or not in the draft guide? Make sure you let us know in the comments as well. Headliner Nation, I hope you all are staying safe, staying healthy. You're tuning into the channel. Football's almost here. We heard earlier today and yesterday that training camp should start on time. We're going to be getting some football really soon, ladies and gentlemen. I'll talk to you all later. Have a great rest of your weekend, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.